Hi class, this is Sir Alex Basco, and today we are finally discussing the last part of lesson 4. This is lesson 4.2. We are still talking about the origin of life, but this time we are going to talk about some of the theories about the origin of life. If you guys remember a bit, we've discussed some of it in Biology 1. We discussed about the abiogenesis, the primordial soup theory, and we are going to go back on those topics, but this time we're going to elaborate a little bit more about these theories and who discovered them or who proposed them, and what are some of the supporting facts or experimentation that gives us an idea on the origin of life. So at the end of today's lesson, what I want everyone to be able to do is be able for you to identify and discuss some of the various theories about the origin of life. So without further ado, let's begin our discussion. First, let's talk about some of the predicament or some of the dilemmas or problems that we may encounter when we are talking about the origin of life. If you want to study the origin of life, it can be very difficult. Not only because it's been a long time, it's been like millions of years since life started on Earth. At least that's what we believe, and that's what studies have been showing us, that life on Earth has started billions of years ago. But one of the two main issues in studying the origin of life is, first is that the conditions when life began is unknown. It is impossible to go back billions of years ago for us to be able to identify what is the condition of the Earth when life began. This is very important because how can we know how life began if we do not know the conditions that factored in or contributed to the existence of life? As you've seen later, one of the things that our researchers and the science body did was to actually try and understand these conditions, these early conditions, and see if we can replicate or copy or duplicate these conditions in our experiment and see if we can actually begin another life. So something like that. One of the issues or one of the problems in studying about the origin of life, that the conditions are unknown. Another issue is life is complex. We've discussed about this. We do not actually know what the meaning of life is. We cannot put a meaning on a vague term. Life is a very vague term. So what we can do best is to create characteristics, to list characteristics that all life on Earth shares. So one of which, if you guys remember, is, for example, growth and development, reproduction, homeostasis. So those are some just of the characteristics that we know about life. But in the end, that does not define life. It just describes it. The definition of life is very complex of what it is, and we do not know about it, or we do not know enough about it to understand it fully. So because of these two predicaments, these two problems, it is often proven to be really difficult to understand how life began on Earth. However, our scientists, battled through and studied enough and investigated enough to give us some of the theories that we know today on how the life began. Let's start with what we call panspermia. Panspermia is actually a combination of two words, pan meaning all and sperma means seed. So the word sperm actually is derivative of the word sperma meaning seed, pan meaning all. So this panspermia just basically means all seeds. But what does panspermia theorizes? In panspermia, we believe that life existed throughout the universe. So not only on Earth, but life is everywhere in the universe. And what happened is that these life that exists through universe actually entered into the Earth's atmosphere via space dust, meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and even if we travel in space with our spacecrafts and spaceships, we sometimes take some of these life forms that is existing in the universe and bring it back home. So in panspermia, we believe that during the creation, you can think about it as the Big Bang, when there's a massive explosion in the universe, in the creation of the universe, during the early life, or during the early stages of the development of Earth. If you guys remember our discussion about circa 4.5 billion years ago, something like that, that there are a lot of comets coming and raining down onto the surface of the Earth, which creates a sea of magma, or sea of lava on the Earth's surface. We do not have crust back then, and they believe that as these comets keeps coming hurling onto the surface of the Earth, these comets sometimes trap life. They get trapped when when there are some massive explosions that happen in the universe, or they just floating in this space and they get caught up with the space dust or those meteors, and they were distributed here on Earth. And we believe that from those life, or from those living organisms, living small organisms that is in the space already, that is in the universe, it starts to proliferate in the Earth. That's how they existed. So that's what we believe in panspermia. So we can think of it as we all started as an alien. This life form started, somewhere in space, and because of just, probability, and just, what's the word? It just happened to be, that life got caught up in space via meteorite, or, an asteroid, and then it landed on Earth. So that's what we believe in panspermia. The second theory that we study about the origin of life is called abiogenesis, and I hope you guys remember what abiogenesis is. Today we're going to expound more on some of the models of abiogenesis. From the word itself, genesis means the beginning. Bio means life. Anything in science that usually has an A in the beginning, it means without, or nothing, or not. So a bio means no life. So the beginning of life from a non-living matter. So that's what abiogenesis is. It's that the life evolved from inanimate objects. Inanimate is another term for something that is not living. So in abiogenesis, we believe that life started from something that is not originally alive. And we have discussed some of these models and some of these examples, and when we discussed about the maggots that starts to come out of fresh meat that you exposed in the air, which we will go later. But let's discuss more about the 4 important key events or key elements of abiogenesis. Number 1 is, in abiogenesis, it usually involves a reduced gas molecules. So in the beginning of the Earth, we believe that there is a reduced gas atmosphere in the Earth, and if you added an energy source like lightning, like heat, sunlight, and these gas molecules, these reduced gas molecules, eventually you will start a life, and we will show an example of that later on. And also we believe in abiogenesis that because of these reduced gases and molecules, and the development of these various organic molecules, that these biological molecules starts to fill the ocean, creating that soup, that broth that we will discuss later, the Primordial Soup theory. So that's the second key event in abiogenesis. Third is that because of the increase of the biological molecules, we start to create more chemical reaction that eventually creates these information-rich polymers, or another term, RNAs and the DNAs, etc. These important polymers, these proteins, these amino acids are essential in order for us to start life. Because if we manage to create these important polymers, these amino acids that code for our existence, our DNAs per se, this information-rich polymers is our DNA, it's the amino acids. Then if these, number 3, if these step 3 succeeded, then it is inevitable for life to exist, meaning eventually somewhere in time life will exist if these polymers are present. So that's what abiogenesis is all about. So now let's look at some various models of abiogenesis. First is the spontaneous generation. We discussed this spontaneous generation, so meaning spontaneous, sudden generation, sudden creation. You can think of generation, another word is creation. Spontaneous, sudden creation of life. And this is where we believe that living organisms developed from non-living matter. And before we go there, and some of the examples that have supported this belief for a long time is the one that I mentioned. When people in the 18th centuries or older, they saw exposed raw meat, and then suddenly maggots it starts coming out. So they believe, you have a non-living matter there. You have a dead animal meat, can probably think in the kitchen, and then they just left it in there, and suddenly there are maggots in there. So that's what a lot of people think in the beginning. And this is what spontaneous generation is. Living organisms develop from non-living matter. But this has been discredited first by Francesco Redi. He showed that the maggots appear on the uncovered raw beef versus no maggots on the enclosed beef. So what this is Francesco Redi. So he has three groups of jar, and each group has two jars. So he created one that is uncovered. He placed some meat on the jar that is uncovered, and on the second part it is fully covered, and on the third part is a fine mesh where animals can still, or in this case the flies can still get the scent of the rotting meat. And what Francesco Redi discovered and understood that if you leave these meat uncovered, eventually maggots will start to form because of the flies. If you let it covered and sit, there won't be anything. There won't be any maggots. And for the fine mesh or the gauze, the maggots starts to appear on top of the gauze. So from this, Francesco discredited that life cannot exist from non-living matters. But it is further discredited by Louis Pasteur. If you guys remember who Louis Pasteur is, it's basically the father of microbiology. He contributed in our understanding of microorganisms when he saw them under microscope, when he took a sample of water from a lake, and he saw those small microbes that is moving in the water. And sooner or later, he also helps us discover more about the cells. So Louis Pasteur further discredited the spontaneous generation via what we call the S-shaped flask experiment. So this is his picture. But what he did is he basically created a broth, and he placed it in an S flask. This is what we call an S flask. And then he basically boiled it, devoid it of its nutrients, devoid it of the pre-existing microbes. So basically he sterilized the broth. So he created, what he did is, for some, he kept it closed after boiling it and sterilizing it. He kept the broth inside, sterilized, separated. And then on the other one, after sterilizing it, he broke the neck off the microbes or the flask, exposing the soup, the broth that he just sterilized. And after waiting, he noticed that on the unexposed broth, there is no microbial growth. There is no microbial growth because he basically boiled it. But for the exposed broth, after some time, it starts to become turbid, meaning parang nasira na siya, na-spoil siya. And the reason of spoilage is actually microbial growth. So one of the things na alam mo na spoil na yung pagkain mo is because of the smell. It's because these microbes are actually creating gases and creating a lot of reaction in there. So Here he basically disproved that spontaneous generation is, it's not real. You cannot, life cannot exist from non-living matter. And also this experiment of his gave us the idea on how to sterilize our experiments, to make sure that our experiments and our solutions are sterile. So that's the second contribution of this experiment. Okay, so spontaneous generation is just one of the things that we study now, but understand that life cannot and will never exist from non-living materials, as described by Francesco Redi and Louis Pasteur. Next model of abiogenesis is very familiar, I hope you guys are already familiar, is the primordial soup theory. Primordial soup theory actually started from Darwin's letter to a friend. In Darwin's letter, he said that he believed that the Earth's original blend of gases produced broth of organic molecules that, when exposed to light and heat, form the building blocks of life. He stated that in his letter. Of course, it's paraphrased, it's not specifically stated this way. But what he means is that because of the gases, the various gases that is existing on the pre-existence of life in the early Earth, in long 4 billions of years ago, these blends of gases, when they're exposed to a source of energy, I hope you guys are seeing now the pattern. When they were exposed to energy like light and heat, these gases, these reduced gases, starts to form organic molecules. And from these simple organic molecules, they become more complex and they become information rich, which basically the amino acids that eventually created the life on Earth. So that's what primordial soup theory is. And Alexander Oparin is a Russian scientist. He actually extended on Darwin's theory that life developed through gradual chemical changes of organic molecules. So here's a picture of Alexander Oparin. He is a biochemist, and he also believed about the primordial soup theory, wherein the origin of life comes from gradual changes of the building blocks of these various blends of gases. And then Roberto Shapiro gave us 4 conditions that resulted on the origin of life. Basically, he summarized the primordial soup theory. Number 1, Earth has a chemically reduced atmosphere. So this is the original blend of the gases in the early Earth. And these atmospheres, when exposed to energy, slowly coagulates. They slowly starts to form to create what we call simple organic compounds. And after creating the simple organic compounds, these compounds accumulate in a soup. That's what the broth is. So they start to fill the ocean. That's what we were discussing earlier, the 4 key events. So it's creating this soup, it's creating this broth, it's creating this ocean. So broth and soup is basically a very synonymous term, but think of it as, when you think of soup, you think of a sabaw na maraming sahog. You have the meat, you have the vegetable. You can think of it that way, but instead of you having the meat, having the vegetable, you're having a lot of simple organic compounds there. So when the compounds accumulate or starts to build up or starts to fill this soup, this ocean, these simple organic compounds slowly starts to be processed, and they develop into more complex molecules that is necessary for life, more specifically amino acids, which then finally creates our RNA or DNA, which also gives us a topic of debate, which started first, DNA, RNA, something like that. So this is what primordial soup theory is. So now you may be asking, is this actually possible? Can we create life from just simple organic molecules, from just, various blends of gases? Well, there is a breakthrough experiment by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey. And because of this experiment, it actually showed us that with just water, ammonia, hydrogen and methane, and some electric spark, which mimics the lightning, which is the energy source, that we could actually create the several of the protein precursor necessary for life on Earth. So it's something like this. This is their experiment. So they kind of like, they have this setup here, and they added water, and they boiled that water. And from that boiled water, some of that water gases starts to fill the reaction chamber filled with other things like ammonia, hydrogen, and methane. And from here, they start to create sparks, or from the sparks here, that mimics the lightning, the energy source. And what happens is that as they do that, these various gases that is in this chamber, it starts to produce the various protein precursor. And they starts to form, they starts to combine to each other, creating the amino acids, creating the proteins that is necessary for life. And because of this experiment by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey, we actually, give us an insight that probably, perhaps, the primordial soup theory is actually how life started. Okay, so that is basically the second model of abiogenesis. So the first one was the spontaneous generation that we know is already discredited, and the second is the primordial soup theory, that there is a massive support from this experiment by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey. And then the third one is what we call the clay hypothesis. So basically, Graham Conn Smith proposes that the life on Earth started in a clay type of inorganic substance. So what he believes is that these important molecules, these important compounds that is necessary for life was helped by a clay type organic substance and helps them form, helps to build them up. And then via this clay, it helps them create the pattern for the information rich molecules. So what we mean by that is, on a clay, the molecules starts to gather there and they start to form, and via that clay give the pattern necessary to create those amino acids, those RNAs and DNAs. And lastly, we have the deep hot biosphere hypothesis. So this is by Thomas Gold. So this deep hot biosphere hypothesis kind of like explain the existence of thermophiles. If you guys remember what thermophiles are, it is in our discussion of bacteria when we were talking about prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Thermophiles, prokaryotes, they're prokaryotes that lives in a very hot environment. So for example, from geysers and even in the magma. So what Thomas Gold believed that these thermophiles that actually eat hydrocarbons, or basically fuel, exists in the biosphere, in this hot biosphere. So what we mean is that they do not life begin not on the surface of the earth, but kind of like deep below into the earth, more specifically around the mantle area. And what happens is that we believe that the hydrocarbons, or basically the fuel, we believe them to be to come from pre-existing old animals and plants, for example the dinosaurs. So we believe that the fuel that we use to create gases to run our vehicles come from the fauna and the flora, or the animals and the plants from very long period ago that died and fossilized and create the fuel that we have today. But Thomas Gold believed that this fuel actually already existed when the earth was created, and that these hydrocarbons, this hot hydrocarbons, this area provided a way for bacteria and life to start. So this also was proven or supported by the existence of nanobes. Nanobes are the currently smallest existing life forms of the earth. They are about 1/10 the size of the smallest bacteria that we know. So they're very, very, very small. And we found them in sediments and in rocks when oil Swedish drillers were looking for oil, and we were shocked by their existence. How can such creatures exist in a very hot terrain, or very hot biosphere, or very hot layer of the earth? So that's another models of abiogenesis. Okay, so those are some of the four models of abiogenesis, and we basically discussed two of the most prominent theories about the origin of life, along with the other models of abiogenesis. I hope it's clear, and it's not really that hard of a topic, but if you guys have any question, do not hesitate to message me. Thank you so much, and have a great day.